Most people believe drug prohibition exists to reduce harm and keep society safe. It doesn't, because after 50 years of enforcement, drug use hasn't disappeared. It's grown. More users, more substances, more risk and more punishment. So something doesn't add up. Either the system is failing completely or it's working exactly as intended. And if prohibition isn't really about stopping drugs, what the fuck is it for? Drugs and Addiction, an Anarchist Perspective, Dickie Dredd. This is part 69 of the video series, and we are in the last chapter before the summary chapter, which is chapter 10, Liberation and Legalisation. So, and I'll give you a quick summary of that before we go on to the section in the book. Chapter 10 brings the journey to its natural conclusion, not as an ending, but as a shift in how life is lived. What began as critique of addiction and control becomes something broader, a redefinition of freedom itself. The argument is simple, but not easy. Recovery is not just about stopping a substance, it's about changing the conditions that made it necessary. Addiction thrives in isolation, fear and disconnection. Freedom grows in relationship, rhythm and care. Across this chapter, the focus moves from the individual to the collective. Autonomy proves itself not in standing alone, but in how we show up for each other. Mutual aid, shared responsibility in everyday acts of care become the real infrastructure of recovery. Not institutions, not systems of control, but people paying attention. Come on. Sorry, it's my cat. Pleasure is reclaimed, not feared. A routine becomes chosen, not imposed. And what once looked like weakness begins to look like sensitivity. A capacity to feel that was never the problem, only misdirected. The deeper point is this. Freedom is not a moment of escape. It's continuity, something built, maintained and shared. So the question isn't, are you free? It's what are you building that lasts? So, section 70, so chapter 10, legalisation, liberation and legalisation, section 70, ending the pretense. Why prohibition failed. Prohibition persists because it performs. Its function is not to end drug use, but to stage control. From the opium wars to the present war on drugs, the story has remained the same. The state promises protection from poison, while quietly profiting from the panic it creates. The evidence, however, is unequivocal. After more than half a century of global enforcement, drug use has not declined, but harm has diversified. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime estimates 296 million users worldwide, a 23% increase over the last decade. In the UK, use of cocaine, cannabis and prescription opioids continues to rise despite record policing budgets. The only measurable outcome of prohibition has been the growth of its own apparatus, a global complex of prisons, courts, borders and pharmaceutical markets, and we discussed that in section 61. The claim that prohibition deters use collapses against data. The EMCDDA reports no correlation between punitive policy and lower consumption. The US, with some of the harshest sentences in the developed world, remains the largest consumer market. Portugal, which decriminalised possession in 2001, records lower problem use and far fewer deaths per capita. Prohibition fails because it mistakes behaviour for belief. It imagines that fear can substitute for education. Result is a culture both addicted to substances and to the punishment of those who use them. What I describe in Practical Anarchy as obedience disguised as morality. Economically, the drug war sustains the very trade it claims to destroy. By banning supply, it guarantees profit. The Home Office values the UK cocaine market, this is 2022, market at £9 billion a year. The US Congressional Research Service in 2020 estimates Mexican cartels earn more than $30 billion annually from US demand. Criminalisation concentrates distribution into violent monopolies, while enforcement creates scarcity and price spikes, a textbook demonstration of managed illegality. See in section 35, discuss that as well. Bewley-Taylor showed that early international treaties were shaped less by medical concern than by imperial economics. Controlling narcotics became a mechanism for controlling trade routes. The same logic persists today, with Western banks laundering cartel profits while governments moralise about street-level dealers. Human cost is incalculable. Mexico's militarised campaign, launched under US pressure in 2006, has left more than 300,000 dead. Colombia's Plan Patriota displaced rural populations in the name of crop eradication. In the UK and US, when factories stopped absorbing people, prisons took over. Mass incarceration replacing mass production, with millions locked up for possession rather than trafficking. The addict became the ideal scapegoat, a visible embodiment of social disorder, conveniently poor, racialised and disposable. The war on drugs, Naomi Klein argues, functions as a shock doctrine, a perpetual emergency that justifies authoritarian expansion. Scientific evidence further exposes the hypocrisy. David Nutt demonstrated that alcohol and tobacco cause far more combined harm than LSD, MDMA or psilocybin, yet both remain legal, taxed and culturally endorsed. The supposed rational schedule of the Misuse of Drugs Act in 1971 inverts the hierarchy of danger. Tobacco forms the starkest outlier, responsible for over 8 million deaths globally each year, while its legality is maintained through taxation and political donation. Psychedelics, which show therapeutic potential in treating depression and trauma, remain criminalised because they threaten the managerial model of mind. The pattern is ideological, not scientific. Dulling drugs are domesticated, awakening ones exiled. Portugal's example exposes the illusion. Since 2001, possession for personal use has been treated as an administrative matter. The results are empirical, not theoretical. The key was reallocating funds from policing to treatment and education, a policy Rawls described as rational compassion. The UK, by contrast, spends over £1 billion a year on drug policing, while treatment budgets shrink. The outcome is predictable: incarceration without recovery, statistics without progress. Prohibition also operates as cultural censorship. Government campaigns, tabloid exposés and public service adverts frame intoxication as deviance, while celebrating alcohol as civilization. The respectable couple who drink 2 bottles of wine nightly appear on lifestyle television. The raver who takes MDMA once a month is labelled a criminal. Stuart Hall called this moral regulation through representation, the process by which media define virtue through contrast with vice. The language of epidemic replaces analysis with hysteria, sustaining the illusion that society's sickness resides in its margins rather than its core. At the political level, prohibition has become theatre. Every new crackdown or zero-tolerance initiative offers the comfort of action without consequence. Arrests create headlines, not healing. The addict's mugshot becomes a moral mirror in which the public reaffirms its innocence. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies continue to distribute legal opioids with impunity, and alcohol advertising saturates sports and culture. As Harry observed, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but connection. Yet connection is precisely what prohibition prevents. It replaces empathy with enforcement. The moral arithmetic is unsustainable. Prohibition has failed to protect health, failed to reduce harm, and succeeded only in criminalising the vulnerable while enriching those already powerful. It persists because it serves the interests of capital and control. Industries of fear, more profitable than the substances themselves. Ending this pretense demands a shift from obedience to evidence, a framework based on measurable risk, not mythology. The next section asks what such a model might look like: a system where legality follows logic, education replaces punishment, and care becomes the measure of civilization rather than its disguise. So prohibition was never a solution to drugs. It was a system for controlling people. And once you see that, everything changes. Because the damage isn't just the substances, it's the policies that make them more dangerous, the markets that make them more violent, and the punishments that keep the cycle going. So if the war on drugs hasn't reduced harm, who is it really protecting? And if it isn't protecting us, why the bloody hell does it still exist? Next up, still Chapter 10, Liberation and Legalisation, Part 71, Pathways to Reform.